Hello, this is part 3 in the series on Schillinger harmonization of a diatonic melody. This episode is about chromatic harmonization techniques applied to the diatonic melody that was introduced in part 1. Altering diatonic pitches yields progressions with chromatic chord groups. I'll discuss the fundamentals and harmonization examples in various musical styles. This series is about applying techniques from the Schillinger system of musical composition book 6, which discusses the correlation of harmony and melody. Chapter 3 covers the process of harmonizing a melody. Throughout the series we use the same given diatonic melody. You learn harmonization fundamentals and see a set of examples. In this episode the focus is on chromatic harmonization. Fundamental aspects include single and multiple parallel chromatic operations for triads and seventh chords. The application examples are based on the diatonic melody from part 1 and diatonic progressions in various modes created in part 2. You may support my tutorial production efforts through a PayPal donation or become a long-term patron. Let's now dive into the chromatic harmonization approach. This section summarizes the content from part 1. You may want to fast forward to section 3 for the new aspects. The Schillinger system context for this series on harmonization is book 6 from his System of Musical Composition, which correlates melody aspects from book 3 and the special theory of harmony in book 5. Part 1 presented this overview diagram, with the symbol M for melody on the left. I covered the example melody characteristics there in great detail. Book 6, Chapter 3 presents 3 harmonization approaches: diatonic, chromatic and symmetric. The melody may also be of either type, so we have a total of 9 possible combinations, but when the source melody is diatonic, that set reduces to 3 options. In part 2, all chord progressions will be based on a 7-pitch diatonic scale and on chord structures in thirds. In this part you'll see an extension by introducing chromatic alterations, as discussed in detail in Book 5, Chapter 13. Progressions will now be based on chromatic chord groups. Symmetric harmonization is left for part 4 in the series. Watch this video as an introduction to the system terminology. Revisit part 1, where I discussed melody design aspects. This is the annotated melody in staff notation. The 9 measures long phrase is in 4/4 time signature. The melodic continuity is based on the 7-pitch Ionian scale. It has a rhythmic attack duration pattern overlay with 8-note time unit. Thus we have obtained a diatonic melody in C major with typical characteristics, such as an overall pitch curve with climax, and various resistance increasing techniques, such as the leap step patterns, the use of secondary axes, syncopation and the cambiata patterns. Listen to the source diatonic melody in C major. The chromatic system of harmony is part of Schillinger's special theory of harmony. I have not covered it yet in any of my earlier YouTube tutorials, and therefore will take a sidestep and discuss relevant chromatic harmony aspects. Schillinger's Book 5, Chapter 13 is about the chromatic system of harmony. Through chromatic alteration operations applied to diatonic harmony, we obtain a derived extended harmonic idiom in the style of the late Romantic period, with roving chords that frequently switch between tonal centers. I will use this overview diagram with essential chromatic system of harmony elements. It is a subset from the techniques covered in Book 5, Chapter 13. I never could figure out exactly how Schillinger arrived at this system. I guess it is a mix of statistical analysis of late 19th century music, combined with a rigorous filtering of all options available. This system of harmony will produce interesting chord progressions, sometimes with neo-Riemannian theory character, and allowing you to easily move away from the diatonic system limitations. Let's have a closer look at the diagram. This system of harmony involves chromatic operations. Diatonic chordal functions will undergo semitone chromatic alterations as a three-note group: diatonic, chromatic, diatonic. For example, C to C sharp to D. This yields a three-note chromatic group, where starting and closing chord may be either a triad or a seventh chord, but the middle chord must be a seventh chord, thus obtaining a balance, tension, release pattern. The chromatic note alterations involve three-element combinations of chordal functions 1, 3, 5, and 7, and I will show these aspects in multiple short examples. In this harmony system, we may have multiple parallel chromatic operations, but we'll start with the single alteration operation. It is also important to realize that this process is applied to three adjacent chordal functions, where the most common is the 1, 3, 5 basis, the combination of root, third and fifth. Listen to the alteration direction of each chordal function for each triad type, starting with the major triad. Root and fifth move in ascending direction, while the major third descends. The third element is the neighboring diatonic degree from the scale. For the minor triad, these directions become the reverse, with descending root and fifth, and the minor third ascending. In case of an augmented triad, we only apply semitone alteration to chordal functions 1 and 3. For the diminished triad, the root descends. The chordal function 3 moves in upward direction. The semitone note alteration pattern is part of a three-element chromatic chord group. Here you see a number of examples. Opening and closing chord may be either triad or seventh chord. The middle chord must be a seventh chord. Chords may be in root or inversion position. See the labels at the top. In the score I annotated the single alteration operation chordal functions. Notice the constant chordal function pattern 3, 3, 3 in the first example. The single change example 7, 7, 1 discussed later, and the two multiple chordal function change examples 3, 5, 7 and 3, 1, 7. Since a chordal function 7 must resolve properly, some chordal function changes are impossible. The following examples demonstrate different opening triad types. Note that there are both diatonic and non-diatonic options for the final chord in the group. These examples demonstrate how the alteration operation yields chromatic chord groups that could not be achieved in the strictly diatonic system. You may want to interpret these chord changes in the neo-Riemannian theory context. We are working in a new harmonic idiom where tonal centers move all over the place. When the opening chord structure in the chromatic group is a seventh chord S7, we may apply a chromatic operation to that chordal function 7. In case of either a major or minor seventh, there is semitone descending motion. Here are examples for 4 different seventh chord structure types. Do not apply a chromatic operation to the diminished seventh. In the two examples of a chromatic chord group starting with the 7th chord, chordal function 7 is chromatically descending and you may use constant or variable chordal function changes. As I said before, I will not discuss the full chromatic system of harmony, but the next important operation type is the double parallel chromatics. When the lower chordal functions 1, 3 and 5 form a major triad, either chordal function 1 or 5 now move in descending direction, in parallel with the major third. Also for the minor triad, the chromatic step changes direction. Functions 1 or 5 move upward, in parallel with the minor third. Root and 5 are the fundamental chromatic alteration, a 3-note pattern, while the 3 is called complementary and moves once only. Here you see two examples with double parallel chromatics, the first starting from a 7th chord, a case that Schillinger does not demonstrate in his book, the second opening with a triad. The voice leading of the first example has the middle chord, chordal function 7, irregularly resolving upward, but the G to G sharp to A pattern is more important here. For this episode on chromatic harmonization, we need two more elements from the Schillinger chromatic system of harmony. Chromatic operations yield 3-note patterns. These may be juxtaposed, where the next chromatic alteration starts on or after the closing note of the previous group. Alternatively, we find overlapping groups, with the next pattern starting on the middle element in the group. In the chromatic system, you may use what Schillinger calls coinciding chromatic groups. Outward from or inward motion towards a chordal function doubling. Here are 5 examples of opening and closing motion for different chordal functions. These may also be doublings at the octave interval. This completes the introduction of the element set from the chromatic system of harmony that we need to create chord progressions in that style. You'll see 2 example progressions, one in major, the other in minor. This is a somewhat longer chromatic chord progression in D major. Inspect the stable triad structures and note how this progression moves through various tonal centers, from tonic major D to lowered sub-median B flat, minor subdominant degree G minor, Neapolitan lowered 2nd degree E flat before returning to D major. It contains various chromatic operation types, single and double operations, overlapping and contrary motion coincident chromatic groups. The voice leading becomes tricky when trying to comply with all chromatic harmony requirements. I've marked contrary motion into doubled triad chordal functions, the preparation of the dissonant 7, and then correct, acceptable and faulty resolution of the 7. There is enharmonic notation of chromatic alterations. Listen to this progression. It is hard to pinpoint the fundamental key of this phrase. The floating quality is definitely different from the diatonic harmony idiom. Let's repeat the exercise and create a chromatic chord progression in A minor. Again, the stable triads are not on the diatonic degrees in A minor. The example closes with an incomplete triad where 5 is omitted. We find single and double chromatic operations, and there are overlapping and coinciding chromatic groups. The voice leading is a lot better this time, with contrary motion into doublings, handling of the dissonant chordal function 7 and resolution of lowered fifths. We return to the original problem, chromatic harmonization of the diatonic source melody. In part 2 from the series you learned several aspects that are relevant for the combination of melody and harmony. First, there is the chord density, expressed as the ratio m/h. We may create sparse or dense harmony, where the latter has multiple chords per melody note. Schillinger gives guidelines for the relation between the melody note chordal function number and the chord tension level, the highest chordal function in an extended chord. As the diagram shows, the recommended tension level is equal to or one level below the melody chordal function, the green squares in the diagram. Other specifics will be discussed as we take a closer look at chromatic harmonization of the opening measures. Here are the opening measures with a 4-part diatonic harmonization in C on the left. The chord density is 2, that is, 2 melody notes per chord. The melody chordal functions are shown at the top. The tension range is between root and 7. I used triads only in the diatonic harmonization, with 2 negative and 1 positive root cycle. The R7, going from G to A minor, is a deceptive cadence. Middle parts are moving mainly stepwise. There are 2 cases of suboptimal step leap patterns. Now over to the chromatic harmonization on the right. Schillinger's guidelines imply inserting chromatic alteration operations in between the original diatonic chords. The diagram in the lower left corner illustrates the diatonic harmony modification process. A diatonic chord from the original harmonization becomes the first structure in the 3-chord chromatic group. The closing chord may be a diatonic structure, or we shorten the chord durations to close the group before the next diatonic chord. We end up with voice-leading conflicts, especially for extended or altered diatonic chords. Then I frequently resort to a more free approach, as I will show later. The melody note regularly returns as a harmony part doubling. Schillinger prohibits the alteration of dead pitch. For example, the first melody note is pitch G, that you also find in the harmony. Do not alter that harmony note. In the score I marked the other doublings, none of which undergo alterations. This example contains 1 single and multiple double parallel chromatic operations, with many intertwined 7th chords. The root cycle pattern shows a mix of diatonic and chromatic system cycles. There are many negative root cycles. The roving chords make this phrase more interesting, but simultaneously take away tonal stability. Even for this 3 measures long phrase, fulfilling all good voice leading requirements makes a very complicated puzzle. Chromatic alteration patterns, preparation and resolution of dissonant 7ths and diminished 5ths, prevention of parallel 5ths and octaves, outer-part contrary motion. It is a very hard job even to create these tutorial examples, and there definitely are flaws. Listen to the result. This diatonic harmonization is in the E minor mode. In measure 1 we find 2 chords, E minor to C major, for harmonizing melody pitch G. In part 2 in the series, Schillinger recommends increasing melody tension range for such held notes, and here it becomes the 5th of the 2nd chord. The melody tension range is wider now, with the highest chordal function 11 in measure 2. The 4-part harmonization uses triads only, with mainly positive diatonic root cycles and smooth voice leading. The chromatic harmonization solution shows a more liberal approach. Firstly, not all diatonic triads return. The C major triad is missing. Then I did alter a doubled melody note into harmony, see the pitch G in measure 2. However, I carefully chose an ascending chromatic alteration operation, with G going to G sharp. For a sustained G in the lead, the interval would have changed from an octave to an acceptable major seventh. Chromatic alteration operations include the single, double parallel and coinciding groups. You'll find the latter as a closing motion approach of the doubled pitch A on beat 1 in measure 3. In general, there's better voice leading now. See the handling of dissonant chordal functions 7, 9 and diminished fifth. There is one nasty exact parallel fifth at the end. I find the strict Schillinger approach most restrictive and yielding too many voice-leading conflicts. In the final opening measures example, I demonstrate the effect of high melody chordal function numbers and diatonic harmonization with both triads and seventh chords. This yields a different, a more contemporary music character. It has one positive and two negative diatonic root cycles. I've marked the voice leading, the handling of the dissonant sevenths, and parallel versus contrary motion. In the chromatic harmonization, only two diatonic chords from the original return. As in the previous examples, the chord density has significantly increased. You'll find 3 single and 1 double parallel chromatic alteration operation. The result sounds like a modern chromatic jazz harmonization, and that completes the demonstration of the fundamental chromatic harmonization aspects. I'll proceed with a number of chromatic harmony system solutions as full melody accompaniment. By applying various chromatic operation types, we obtain the chromatic harmony chord progression. You will hear instrumental form examples in various musical styles. Watch this tutorial for an introduction to Schillinger instrumental forms. Since this is a demonstration of the strict approach, we start from the diatonic harmonization discussed in detail in part 2. The chromatic harmony derivative is shown at the top. Since the original harmonization is quite dense, in the strict approach there is very limited room to insert chromatic chord groups. This would have been easier for a sparse harmonization. I will not discuss the chromatic harmonization solution as exhaustively as I did for the opening measures examples. You'll see the highlights, and it is more important to get a feel for the musical effect of chromatic alteration operations. Due to the limited options for inserting chromatic chord groups, here we find mostly chromatic passing tones. I've marked descending and ascending 3 to 6 note groups. The result yields a set of intermediate seventh chords, which may be considered the middle chord in a chromatic chord group. The voice leading markings show the handling of dissonant chordal functions and contrary versus parallel motion. The instrumental form is for orchestra, in a moderate tempo romantic setting. I featured the application of melody Hockete's technique, a subject discussed in this tutorial. Listen how the melody moves through the orchestra sections with frequently changing accompaniment. When ignoring the Schillinger recommendation to start from the diatonic harmonization framework and instead use a more liberal approach, we obtain this alternative chromatic harmonization solution. There's still a set of diatonic triads in this progression. It has a plagal, modal, closing cadence. I've marked the various chromatic alteration operation types: the single, note the two overlapping, and the coinciding chromatic groups. The arrows show dissonant chordal function handling and contrary versus parallel motion. Notice the chord density increase near the end. Here's another chromatic harmonization in C, with multiple single and one double parallel operation. I've marked both diatonic chords and non-diatonic triads. Note that I altered the doubled pitch G in the harmony, against Schillinger's recommendation. I've marked chromatic chord groups and the voice leading. There should have been a seventh chord in measure 2. The example closes with a plagal cadence. The instrumental form is a quasi-chorale setting for brass quintet. It is transposed down by a major second to obtain a more suitable key for these instruments. The next chromatic harmonization example in C major uses higher melody chordal functions. The approach is based on the selection of appropriate extended chords that support the melody tension range. This yields two-note chromatic operations, not in accordance with the strict Schillinger technique. It is reminiscent of the diatonic symmetric system of harmony. The musical idiom is contemporary, with most liberal voice leading and dissonance handling. This string of extended chords with alterations is set for a small fusion jazz group. The next chromatic harmonization is in a minor mode. We start from the diatonic harmonization discussed in detail in part 2 in this series. It consists of triads only, and there's a plagal closing cadence. When inserting chromatic alterations, little of the original diatonic chords remain. Measure 3 is a harmonic sequence, and I changed the closing cadence to major. The setting has become a mix of the strict Schillinger approach with 3-note single and double parallel operations, and a more free approach with other chromatic patterns. The voice leading shows the handling of dissonant chordal functions 7, 9 and diminished fifth, plus contrary versus parallel motion into note doublings. At this high density of extended and altered chords, correct traditional harmony voice leading is impossible. Again, we have achieved a more contemporary idiom, mixing strict and free harmonization. Another example from part 2 was the diatonic harmonization in G Mixolydian. This has high chord density, most of the chords are triads, and there's a modal half cadence closing. In the chromatic harmonization solution, the melody tension range has increased, with many higher chordal functions. Most of the original harmony has changed. Here also, the Schillinger recommendation to insert chromatic operations in the diatonic harmony source I find most impractical. So there are many new chords, and I marked those with non-diatonic root. Inspect the annotated score, where strict 3 or more note chromatic alterations and the 2-note patterns have been marked. My conclusion is that there is a fundamental conflict in the chromatic harmonization approach, especially in the case of higher melody tension range. On one side, we need extended chords for good melody support, but then the voice leading, combining traditional harmony dissonance handling with chromatic 3-note patterns, is very problematic. The strict Schillinger method is suitable for the late Romantic period style of music, but in my examples the results all have a more modern character, that allow incorrect preparation resolution and parallel motion. The final example in this tutorial moves from C major to E minor mode, with a fresh chromatic harmonization that is not based on a diatonic harmony source. This is dense harmony with a mix of triads and extended chords, and a mix of diatonic and chromatic root cycles. The markings show single chromatic operations on the chordal functions 1, 3, 5 and 7, a number of coinciding chromatic groups near the end, and other 2 to 4 note chromatic passing tones. The instrumental form is a setting for synthesizers and band. I will first present the separate musical elements, then play the combination. The diatonic melody is divided over the various instrument groups, soloists and sections, using Hocket technique. Synthesizers play the bass part, harmony pads plus occasional lead phrases. Also, brass and woodwind fulfill several roles, melodically and harmonically. The string section is doubling middle register parts and adds upper layer harmony. Listen to the full ensemble playing this chromatic harmonization setting. This has been a long session. Since the subject is chromatic harmonization of a diatonic melody, I had to take a sidestep and introduce chromatic system of harmony fundamentals. These include the 4 essential chromatic operation types: single, double parallel, overlapping, and coinciding. I demonstrated chromatic harmony principles on the melody opening measures and then on the full melody. I hope I could make it clear that for a given melody, harmony voice leading is problematic due to too many conflicting requirements in traditional diatonic harmony. We have to compromise, and the results yield a more contemporary musical idiom, such as in popular and jazz music, where the strict dissonance handling requirement is released and parallel motion more acceptable. The remaining approach, symmetric harmonization, is left for part 4 in the series. For my Patreon supporters, there's a companion document with text diagrams and score fragments. I hope you liked this extended tutorial. Please subscribe to the channel. Use the video description links to support my educational production efforts through a PayPal donation or as a patron. Visit the website for more content, and thanks for watching.